I Killed a Man to Escape a Snowstorm, written by MortifyMore. The call came in the late evening. The orange in the sky had left and all the animals had burrowed away, anticipating the storm heading north. I was on the outskirts of Cadence, eating a Milky Way and watching the stars disappear behind the clouds. The cruiser's phone rang and dispatch notified me a man had wrecked on Route 16, heading south to Lilac. What happened was the storm had covered the road, which is normally empty at night. Cadence is a small town and Lilac is even smaller. The only people who drive down Route 16 are the farmers needing groceries, and they're never out that late. I figured the wreck was an outsider. Somebody who didn't know the roads tend to be unsalted since the town saves money by giving that job to the sun. Dispatch told me a tow was on the way, but that it would be at least an hour. The guy would feel safer with the cops there. But small towns have small forces, and it was my night on patrol. I'd have to do. I finished off my Milky Way and drove off. Minutes on the road, and the white winds already rushed past my car. The dashboard said 45, but the winds made it feel like I was pushing 70. I worried that I would miss the wreck, that the winds might actually make me a new victim. But in the distance, I saw the red brakes, then the back of a sedan. I flipped my lights and parked 10 feet away, wishing that I had remembered my snow hat. I didn't bother getting my clipboard, just my flashlight. Though even that felt useless against the constant white. The wreck was, as I suspected, slid off the road into a nearby ditch, one lower than your average curb. Even without the ice, backing up would have been an act of God. As I approached, I nearly slipped myself and had to catch myself on nothing. The front of the sedan was caked in snow, deep in the ditch, but the driver's side door was ajar. I stepped down into the ditch and pulled the door open more. The car was running, but not the heat. My flashlight revealed an empty car. I turned and looked around the street and nearby cornfields painted red and blue by the cruiser's lights. Where was the man? I walked around the car, inspected the underside. There was nothing. I popped the trunk, empty. Back on the street, I looked over the car again. Something about it was off, beyond the mystery of the missing man. What was it? I couldn't put my finger on it, but despite the clear nosedive into the snow, the sedan was clean, almost immaculate. I took another look and realized that there was no license plate, not even a temporary one. "Hello?" I asked the cold world. Only the wind replied. Back in the cruiser, I was thinking of where the man went, letting the heat blast against my face. He could have gone south, taken his chance with the storms towards Lilac. Anybody, outsider or not, would have known that it was suicide, though. There was the cornfields nearby. Maybe he ran into those, hoped that he'd find a warm farmhouse. I was about to call it in and put a lookout for a guy trying to survive the snowstorm on foot, when I heard it. A dog barking. It was by the wreck. And then came another sound, though I couldn't make it out inside the cruiser. Outside, the wind bared its teeth to me, howled its demand to go away. But underneath it was the dog's barking. Barking, and then it was gone. A man's voice asked, "Is everything all right?" The dog started barking again. One of the farmers must have heard the wreck and come to investigate. I started towards the wreck, telling the farmer that it was all under control. Except, what was a farmer doing out in a storm? Halfway there, I stopped, and I realized nothing was making sense. The missing guy, an unknown car, and now this. I saw a canine shape move into view from behind the car. The dog. It hadn't stopped barking, and I worried that it would come at me, that things might get dicey out here. The other officers had a running gag that out here, the local dogs never liked pigs. But this one stayed put, barking and barking until it wasn't, and the man was asking me if everything was okay. The question hung in the air. Something churned in my stomach. The dog resumed its barking for a few seconds, then stopped, and the man asked the same question for a third time. And that's when it hit me. The barking. The man's voice. It came from the same place. I shone my flashlight at the dog, and I felt the blood grip my face. It was no dog. A humanoid shape, blasted into obscurity by the winter veil, looked up at me. "Is everything all right?" it asked. It started running, crawling towards me. Before I realized what was happening, there was a gunshot, and I was standing in the snowstorm looking down at the body of a man. I held my breath as I waited for the snow to turn red, let the wind bite my nose, frost my unblinking eyes. But the blood never ran. And what happened instead was the thing shuddered, and he started gagging. The bullet was spit out. I ran to the cruiser to drive away. There was no other option. I slammed the car door, cranked the key. The car rumbled in disagreement and wouldn't start. In my head, I was screaming with the wind, wondering how hard you need to palm slam a wheel to fuel a car with desperation. Barking interrupted my thoughts. I started to blubber to myself, all of those years of wanting to be a cop suddenly going out my ears, melting to the floor. A hand smacked onto the window and I screamed. I slammed the car wheel harder, turning the keys enough to snap it. From outside, the thing asked me if everything was okay. I just kept screaming. The car started suddenly. Foot down, reverse, brake, foot down, going, leaving whatever that thing was behind. And while the snow blew past, while I tried to stop myself from blubbering, I wondered what all had just happened. What had I wandered into? Things like that don't ever have answers, just more questions. I just started asking, why? That word was on my lips when the car started to swerve, and in that moment, I did everything wrong. I forgot all my training in the frenzy. The cruiser flipped on its side, and I was lucky to not be crushed. I was crawling out of the window when two headlights cut through the snow right at me. The next thing I saw was a large man getting out of a truck. It was the tow. He was rushing over to me, asking if I was okay. All I could do was mumble. He helped me to my feet and walked me over to the truck. My head was turned behind us the entire time, waiting to see that naked figure walking down the road. The inside of the truck smelled like sweat, and to this day I remember it. He was on the street, I was in the truck, and he was asking me details. Where I had to be, and telling me that he was out for another, and had I been the officer they sent out. I couldn't answer him, it felt unreal. And when I looked out the windshield to the cold forever, I saw an outline and began to cough and to gag. I heard the trucker ask what was going on, and then he was walking towards it. I got out and told him to stay away. I ran to him to shake his shoulders, except I didn't. That wreck I had, it had numbed me. So I just stood there, mouthing words and shaking my head no to the trucker's back. And then it happened. The thing was in the air, then on the trucker. And that blood that was supposed to come earlier from the gunshot, It must have jumped through time because a shower burst from the trucker. There was a scream, and all I saw was a cloud of red. I opened my mouth to scream, but just kept coughing. In the movies, the monster realizes that it's been seen, looks up from the fresh kill, and starts gibbering towards the new meat. But the thing never moved from the trucker's body, and I knew that it was just going to finish eating him or God knows what else. So, like a coward, I got into the truck. I stretched out my shaking hands on the wheel and I hit the gas. I didn't even run over the thing. I just rushed past it, not letting myself look over my shoulder, for fear that the thing would be looking at me, and for fear that the trucker would be. I drove all the way to Lilac. I fell out of the truck into the snow-covered parking lot of a Dollar General. In my dreams, I still see that store, and at the counter is the trucker, his blood coursing down onto the conveyor belt. He's mouthing something I can't hear. Sometimes he's barking instead. I never look outside to the parking lot to see if the thing's out there. The next morning, I called in with my resignation. When they asked why, I just hung up. A friend on the force told me that they eventually went out and searched for the trucker, since his wife called terrified that he had met an unseen fate in the storm. They never found him. I remember laughing at that news, though I couldn't tell you why. In the coming days, they tried pulling me in for a statement to answer why the guy's truck sat battery dead at a Dollar General. But I was heading south to somewhere, anywhere that the snow avoided. I expected to be chased either by my old colleagues or by that thing, somehow. But it never happened. Since then, I've read up on what it could be, dug up the past to figure out my present. If you ask me, I still couldn't tell you what I saw. But I remember the old stories my father used to tell me about, of bandits on the road. How these bandits would stage fake accidents, take advantage of the kindness of others. How that still happened to this very day. Except instead of men in cowboy hats, they're entire groups. A strength in numbers thing, I guess. But I'm told that that's rare. At first, that explanation didn't quite fit. But the world's a strange place, and if caterpillars can look like snakes, well, maybe something watched from the shadows when people used to fake those accidents. Watched people get killed for being too trusting, scrounged up the looted bodies left behind. And when those old-time highwaymen stopped their trade, there was a dwindling of fresh prey. Evolution. Does that explain it? I don't know. But it's the best that I've got when I look up at the night sky. I haven't had a Milky Way in years, but that doesn't make up for what I did. Maybe one day I'll go back, stand in the snowstorm by a mysterious car, do what I should have done back then. Maybe the storm will die down and the thing's face will be revealed. And maybe I'll look into the stolen eyes of the trucker and whisper, "I'm sorry."